About Gemara, we're starting the third Pedic. That boy, just want to quick catch up. The last thing we learned in Pedic and Gadol about the haircuts. It's actually the last few lines in Gemara is extremely confusing, and the Mepharshim have a hard time sorting it out because the pasuk that talks about the special haircut of the kohanim is talking about ordinary kohanim. And then we move on from there to Kohen Gadol, a special kind of a haircut where the tip of the hair touches the base of the next hair. And that somehow or another describes the Kohen Gadol's haircut, which was much shorter periods. And the Kohen Hedya was just every 30 days. So who had that kind of haircut? So really, it sounds from the Gemara, they both had a similar style haircut, except the Kohen Hedya, somehow or another, we allowed some hair, other hair to grow in between. And therefore, once in 30 days was sufficient. And the Kohen Gadol was only much shorter period. So it's not, the Gemara itself is very, very unclear. Kohen Gadol is once a week, and the Kohen Hedya is every 30 days. Up to the third page, this is called Zeb Boider. A quick preview. Everyone heard about that when you have a Din Torah. Today, generally, we say each one chooses a dayan, and then the two dayanim choose a third dayan. In fact, that's what the Gemara is going to talk about. Who chooses that middle dayan? Is it the two dayanim? Is it the defendant and the litigant? They choose it, or how exactly does it work? And even though we learned previously that a bezin can force a bezin, even if it had yatis, three, can force someone, subpoena someone to come to the Torah. So what's his idea of that boy that each one can choose their own person, and I could just force you to come in front of my Torah. So we have to make sure we get clear. That Gemara is talking about where you are refusing to attend a Din Torah at all. Then we can coerce you to come to the Torah and use all the threats and all the tools that are available to a bezdin. However, here we're talking about, I'm more than happy to go to the Torah. I'm not reluctant, but I don't want to go to your dayan. I want to go to my bezdin. And then therefore we have a system to work it out. Now, very important is also the idea of Bayerim. What exactly is the idea of Bayerim? Why do we actually think it's a good idea that we have each one chooses their own dayan, and then the third dayan is chosen between all, or we'll soon see between who? When we come to that in the Gemara, I'll explain to you, because it's a fascinating, very important rush to understand, and somehow or another, today the Bayer is sometimes evolved and developed in a different path altogether. So before we get to there, let's start the Mishnah. Daf Chav Gimel. Says the Mishnah, Dinei Momnis Vishleisha. When it comes to matters of commercial law, we learned already in the first Mishnah, is three dayanim. Ze Boider Lai Echad, Ze Boider Lai Echad. Each party to this case chooses a dayan, ushnei hen, and both of them. That's not clear who the shnei now was. So see, right now we're learning according to that measure. Shnei means that the baladin, boider lehen oid echad, that the two baladin, that's the plaintiff and the defendant, they go ahead and they choose their third dayan as well, and they have to agree to it. Divrei Rameir, these are the words of Rameir. Now, the thing is, the Gemara is going to think that when it says Zeb Boider Lo'echa, you start off Dini Mamas and three, and each one chooses one. So the Gemara is going to think that Echad means one bezin. So I choose a bezin, you choose a bezin, and then the two Badin choose a third bezin, which sounds like there are 9 people involved. And the Gemara will discuss that soon. Says Gemara, the Chacham agree. They say Shnei Diyan Boider Lo'echa. It's the two judges that choose the third one. Pretty clear for the Chachamim that we're not talking about two Batei Din and choosing a third bezin, but rather that the two dayanim, each one selected one dayan, they choose a third one. Ze Paisel Dayan, next case in the Mishnah. Ze Paisel Dayan shel Ze, that each party has a right to delegitimize the other person's selection. The Ze Paisel Dayan shel Ze, which is a pretty major thing. I can say that your dayan is disqualified. The Chachamim say I can't just disqualify your dayan. I have to have grounds. Maybe if I can bring some evidence, that they're relatives to the defendant or plaintiff, whatever it is, or they are disqualified for other reasons, okay. If they were proper. Or they were mumchin, either mumchin of Singamar later can mean they were experts or they were appointed by a bezin. I can't just willy-nilly go ahead and disqualify your dayan. That's argument number one. And we have a similar argument when it comes to witnesses, which is even more astonishing. You can disqualify my witnesses, I can disqualify your witnesses. the Gemara is going to find that very difficult. What means? Then how can you ever have a case? Every time you bring witnesses against me, I'll just disqualify them. So we'll see in the Chachamim before that says, Amosai, no, you need to have evidence to support your allegations. Amosai is mansion, maybe I need to bring evidence in Kravin that these are Adim, our relatives, are disqualified on grounds. Shading, if they were kosher people, any Yochel have no grounds to disqualify them. Okay, so the Mishnah needs a lot of explanation, and we'll tease it out, and the Gemara will explain, tease it out of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, first let's understand the very first opening of the Mishnah. Let me each one chooses one. That sounds like each bezdin, you choose a bezdin, I choose a bezdin, let me choose a third bezdin. 3 is enough. Tracy says it can't be, that's Gemara even thought. Because that's Gemara thought, the Gemara had a better question. The first 3 words of the Mishnah is Dini Mamers L'Shloisha, then you spell it out, you need 9. So Taisha says it's a more technical question or a legal question. It's more the syntax, because the words in the Mishnah sounds like that you need 9. When it's not a question legal, because we know it doesn't mean that. It means 3. So what is exactly the word in the Mishnah? But Rashi learned. We thought for a moment that maybe you need you need 9 judges. As the Gemara Hachikam, that's what he means. If you chose one bezin, right? You cannot force me to go to your bezin. So let's say if we chose one bezin and you disqualified the bezin that I chose. So then you chose the bezin and I disqualify your bezin. And now we have a problem. We have no bezin to work with. Then we both have to agree on a bezin that we will front up to. And then we go further. It sounds like it says each one. So I feel loiva matzamakiv. So one thing is the creditor. The creditor is owed money, and I'm not happy with his bezin. But the debtor, who we say eved loiva leish malva, that the loiva is sort of is subordinate to the lender, he can just say, I'm not interested in your bezin. V'amar Abelazar, did Abelazar say loishanu el malva? The malva has a right to say, look, I don't like your bezin, I want to go to another bezin. I have a leiva, but the leiva can't say, I don't want your bezin, let's go travel somewhere else. And the reason is very simple. The leiva is going to force the malva to have expenses that might even be greater than the entire amount of the loan. Is koifen oisev done beirei. The malva can say, I want to go right here. So what in the Mishnah sounds like either party can disqualify a bezin. How can the borrower disqualify a bezin? So the Gemara said, he explained, when does Rabbi Lazar say that you cannot disqualify a bezin if it's a proper bezin? But later on, he'll talk about, you're talking about ordinary bezin, but we're talking about a Jewish bezin, not a Goyish bezin, even though the words erkoyish sounds like it. Talking about hadyotis, ordinary dayanim. Then I can say, I don't want to go to this bezin of ordinary people. I want to have proper dayanim. Is hachanami berkoyish. That's what we're talking about over here. When do we say here that the borrower, either party can disqualify the bezin, but when do we say that we can disqualify the bezin? Only we're talking about ordinary dayanim, not if they are experts. If they're experts in law, mumchin, then the borrower definitely cannot disqualify the bezin. But not mumchin. So that's how we learn pshat in the Mishnah, that I disqualified your bezin, and you disqualified my bezin. We both have to agree on the bezin. And how could the borrower disqualify a bezin? Because they were ordinary people. So I'm not happy to go to a bezin of ordinary people. Fine. That's explanation number 1. Explanation number 2. Papa says. Now, this is very interesting, by the way. I'm digressing totally here. But there's a whole movement of modern thinkers in the Gemara that they argue that most of the Gemara, they argue terrible things, but they argue that most of the Gemara was written by the Rabbanon Sivaroi. This is the Bar Ilan University professors and critic of the Talmud. They argue that most of the Gemara written by Rabbanon Sivaroi, most of the Shaklatayas, and the only Gemara that's real Gemara is where it says a name, Papa Omar, and so on and so forth. And when they came to us in Australia and they presented their whole view, and they've tried to say that the Rambam, that's how the Rambam learns, and therefore a lot of times the Rambam rules differently than we think, because the Rambam ignores the Shaklatay, the Gemara, which is Rabbanon Sivaroi, and he goes straight to the Amorai. And I then asked him, but Rashi told us clearly, when the Gemara said the Chasimus of Talmud is by Ravina Rav Ashi, and Rashi explains that means that all the Shakla, the Gemara, all the debates the Gemara is written by Ravina Rav Ashi, And in fact, we have a few traces throughout Shas and Ritva and a few others, a few lines here and there where might not be the Gemara. Like the beginning of Kedushin, where the Rishonim say this little part here, Amar Al, is not the Gemara, it's the written Rabban Sarai, or in the beginning of Ksubah, traces of the Rabbi Chai, might be Shield of the Rabbi Chai. A few places throughout Shas, but 99.9% is everything is Gemara. Anyway, so they told me then that Rashi doesn't really understand how Gemara works. The Rambam did. But here, you see Gemara clearly here. You have a Shakla V'Tarya, no names. And Rapapa suddenly is in there. Rapapa, who's he talking to? If the Shakla V'Tarya never happened. So many, Rabbanus Roy was after Rabbeinu Ramashi. They were the generation afterwards. They were there like the bridge between that and the next period of Goinim. Who's Rapapa talking to? You see this whole Gemara here. We have a Shakla V'Tarya and then interspersed with a few Amoraim. Clearly, every Shakla V'Tarya was in the yeshivas of Amoraim. And Chas v'Shalom to say that otherwise. Anyway, the Gemara continues. Rapapa says, Afilu tema mumchin. I can disqualify a bezin, continuing the same thing. I'm disqualifying your bezin, and even they're experts, I can disqualify them. When you disqualify them, I want to go to another bezin. When? Kigoyin beidina de Rav Huna de Rav Chizda. That Rav Huna and Rav Chizda, they were neighboring, they lived near each other. And in this case, the creditor can say the whole reason is because I'm giving you expense. But here they're in the same city. I don't want to go to this bezin. I'm going to go to that bezin. They're both qualified. Am I causing you any tircha, any bother, any expense? They're both in the same city. And therefore, I have a right to say, I don't want to go to your bezin, I'll go to this bezin. Interesting, machlek is a shaynim, because Rav Huna and Rav Chizda Rav Chizda was actually a student of Rav Huna, and we had an interesting Gemara at the end of Elu Metzias, where the Mishnah there says that if you lost your item and your teacher lost his item, you got to give the teacher first. If you lost your item and your father, Avei Dosa, Avei Des Rabbi, Avei Dosa Kedemis, or Avei Des Rabbi Kedemis. So the Gemara, so Rav Chizda turned around. Rav Chizda turned around and said to he turned around and he said, "What about Rav should tzarich talmidei?" Rav Chizda said to Rav Huna, "What a rabbi, a teacher, but the teacher actually needs the student," and he meant himself. Because I'm also teaching you things, I'm telling you things other people said. Rav Huna got so incensed. Rav Huna says, Chizda, you think I need you? I can live without you. And for the next 40 years, they didn't talk to each other. And Rav Chizda fasted 40 days for upsetting Rav Huna, and Rav Huna fasted 40 days for being choshed Rav Chizda that he meant himself. And so we know that Chizda was inferior to Rav Huna. So big machlek is a shaynim. Does that mean let's say there's one bezin in the town that is superior, and the next bezin in the town which is sort of not as good? I mean, they're knowledgeable, but not on the same level. Can I say I don't want to go to the superior? I want to go to the I don't want to go to Rav Huna. I want to go to Rav Chizda. And they brought to bring an eye from here. That's look, he went from Rav Huna, he went to Rav Chizda. So we see clearly that even the other bezin is not as good, but as long as they're competent, it's good enough. And I can say I'm not interested in going to your bezin. Come to my bezin. The borrower can say. The other Rishonim say no. That if the superior, then you cannot take away from the superior and inferior. And over here, we're not talking about Rav Huna Rav Chizda, we're talking about the students of Rav Huna Rav Chizda. Because as Chase himself asks, how could Rav Chizda rule in the presence of Rav Huna? How could Rav Chizda rule in the presence of Rav Huna? And when you know that Rav Chizda said that the student should not pass within a certain distance of the Rebbe. In fact, Chase says that Rav Chizda was right outside the 12-kilometer line, and therefore he didn't have the bezin. In fact, Chase rules. But I can say to you, let's travel a little bit, not outside the region, I can force you to go to another bezin. And then, we're talking about Rav Chizda outside. Now, if you learn it was actually Rav Chizda, what Tracy clearly was Rav Chizda himself and Rav Huna, nevertheless, we can say, lav dafka, you can go to inferior bezin, because, I told you, we're talking about maybe the students of Rav Chizda. And then Tracy's probably not a problem. But others want to say that, regarding Tracy's question, how can you student paskin from his Rebbe? When is that a problem when it comes to a law of Isser V'Hetes, kosher, not kosher? Now, paskin when your Rebbe is present. Definitely within 12 kilometers, even if you have Rishus, according to most Rishonim. But over here, we're talking about a din Torah dispute. Where does it say that you're not allowed to adjudicate a dispute if your Rebbe is in town? Why can't you? As we say, look at Moshe Rabbeinu. As the Rishonim pointed out, Moshe Rabbeinu had judges of 100, judges of 1,000. So we see that you could have judges performing, even though their Rebbe is there. Others say there's no proof from there because Moshe Rabbeinu gave them all permission to paskin. Others say that doesn't help because we learned that even if you have permission, you're not allowed paskin in the vicinity of your Rebbe. It must be that din Taitas are treated differently. Anyway, the Gemara continues. You're telling me talking about Bezdin's a squalor, and you choose a Bezdin, and I don't like it, and I choose a Bezdin. Let me ask you a question. Tanan, we learn. The Chachamim say the two judges choose the third one. So we're not talking about courts, we're talking about individual judges. If it's the way you're learning what, I'm choosing a Bezdin, boss of the apostle, also bottle of Bezdin. If you're talking about the button, I disqualified yours, you disqualified mine, what? And these two disqualified Bezdin, I'm going to choose who the third Bezdin will be. Doesn't make sense. And plus the wording. But also, my zeb boider like echad was zeb boider like echad. The wording echad sounds like a single individual dying. So the Gemara, this is where we go back. We're talking about judges. So what's pshat in the Mishnah? Zeb boider like echad, boider like echad. It means as follows: Kisha zeb boider like echad. If let's say this person chose one, and the zeb boider like dying echad, I chose one dying, you chose one dying. Shnei hen. These two will choose a third one. These two will choose a third one. If I chose one, you chose one, the two will choose a third one. Now, what's the advantage of this one here? What's the advantage of this way? Ma'ishna of the Hachi. Why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing this way? So we answer. So this is what we're saying here. Zeb Boidel. The problem with Zeb Boidel sounds like this is the way you should be done lechatchila, as if this is the best way forward. That you choose one judge and I choose one judge. Why is that the ideal way? In Israel, the same name of Zeda. In the West, you chose one dayan. This person chose one dayan. And these two will choose a third one. Yotza hadin la'amitay. Then justice will prevail because it will be true. Now Rashi says over here, very important, because there's some who want to learn Rashi a little bit different. Rashi says over here, what do you mean the judgment will come out truthfully? That the two people, the plaintiff and the defendant in the courtroom, they will listen now to the outcome because they are going to say, I chose this dayan, and I am sure that if he could have found any way apeh halacha that I was justified or I'm right, or then I would have been triumphant. So therefore, mitzad, the defendant and the plaintiff, we're happy with the outcome because we think that justice was done. And the dayanim themselves will try to do their best to try to find a way, a basis for finding that their client, let's say, or the one who chose them is right. But if not, they couldn't. That's what Rashi says. So there's a machlekes. So that those who take Rashi literally, that as a blah, and today, unfortunately, it's exactly how it works. That as law comes in and completely defends their client. Even at the time, they know themselves, if they would have been hired by the other person, they would have said that this is not a valid basis, but they're going to say it anyway and hope that the other person's law doesn't know that it's wrong. And the only hezbollah on that is, like the Aruch HaShulchan talks about, the only hezbollah on that way is because since you know that's how Zablah system works, or at least in this bezin, and you know how that Zablah work system in this bezin, since you know that's how it works, so it's as if we were mekabel on ourselves, we accepted that we're happy with this particular format. Just like we're going to learn later, I could choose my father, you can choose your father or my father to be the dayan, even though they're disqualified, but we can choose whatever we want, so as if we chose. The Rush writes the strongest words possible. The Rush writes, I'll just quote you because this is the Rush, the second paragraph in this parak. He calls these people lack of any sense whatsoever. And he says those people who take Rashi literally, that this is a law will completely defend this guy, even at the time they know it's not necessarily correct. And he says the Chalila v'chas, strong language, very strong language. He says Chalila v'chas, they have no idea what Rashi is saying here at all. He says, of course, the dayan. He says Chalila loy. He goes further. It's Chalila for a dayan to find a basis for the person that selected him. If he himself knows Mishas Ma'aseh, he's not 100% convinced that this is right, but he'll say it anyway, and hoping the other side doesn't catch him at a mistake. And he says this is over an Isa the Torah of Mat and Mishpat. The idea is that each side says their thing, and between the two, we'll get to the truth. Amazing. In fact, I was once involved in a heavy din Torah, and and I wasn't a Tain, I was actually a defendant and a co-defendant, and they wanted me to bring a basis for everything that I said. I brought all the poskim that I based myself on, and I lost. The Din Torah, or my side lost the Din Torah, and the following evening, the Dayan, the middle Dayan, who voted against us and lost, called me into his room and he asked me if I can make copies of all of the poskim that I relied on because they're all right, and he needs that for another case he's about to do, and he's going to be defending the side that's similar to what I did. That's what the Rosh means that Zablah is not right, and yet there are people who make Zablah straight that way. And if you look at Pirush Nais and Rambam, it's a bit cryptic. It sounds a little from the Pirush Nais that that's what a Zablah does, and he can do it. Doesn't say it in halacha, but he says that in the Pirush Nais. So maybe that's the basis for those kind of Zablos that are completely blindsided and they only want to see one way. But the problem, that's not even a problem. The problem is when they know at the time when they're saying what they're saying, that this is not necessarily pshat in Shulchan Aruch, or there's another din in Shulchan Aruch that completely changes that. But you're going to conceal that and hoping the other side is not aware. That's where it is a problem. But anyway, let's continue. But interesting, if you follow the way Rashi learns, then it's not called din emes lamita. It's more nothing to do with the din. The din is the same. It's to do more with the defendant and the plaintiff that they will accept the halacha. So it's more a perception of din emes lamita, not really din emes lamita. But Taisa sort of adds, because each side is trying to do the right thing, and even though one side is tilted a bit one way, one side is tilted another way, because you're trying to find every single avenue to defend your partner, but the middle guy who has no biases either way and no leanings either way, he will paskin what he thinks is the right thing. So you'll always have a majority that paskin correctly. So din emes la'am mitad. Saying about it further, the concept of Zablah is very interesting, and the secular word lahavdil find difficult the whole idea of a Zablah, especially when if this guy's a judge and yet he's totally prejudiced. How can that work? But if you follow the way the Rush says, 100%. On the contrary, you have judges trying to find your way, but you have that today as well. In America, you have Republican appointed judges and you have Democrat appointed judges, and generally the ways of thinking are very, very different. It's not just they're looking at the same books of laws, but one person sees it from one perspective, one person sees it from another perspective, and they interpret it accordingly. And even though they're not consciously anyway, in doing anything wrong, but that is just how it is. So Zablaz tease out the truth because the middle one is not biased either way, and he'll try, and they'll both try to influence him, and he will sort it out, and you'll have a majority one way or another. Second one, the Chacham say the Chacham say that the two judges choose the third one. It sounds like from the Rameir holds that the defendant or plaintiff choose the third one, and Rabbi holds the two judges. They won't sign on the shtar unless they know exactly who's joining them. Why takanat? Why won't they join the shtar? Interesting, they're trying to give two different reasons. There are nafkas halacha. I'll just tell you the two reasons. One reason is either because you want to make sure your association is with people. Otherwise, it's a genai. It's insulting that people say degrading that this rabbi is next to that other person. The other reason is much more than that. Is because if that other party is found to be disqualified, and the thing is that if you have a group of Eidim and one of them is disqualified, we learned before, if Kiva says the entire group is disqualified. You didn't say Echem and Karav Apostle, even your 100 witnesses, one person was found disqualified, the entire group. And your name now is tarnished. People will say, you were part of a group of Eidim that were disqualified. And therefore, Minadin, you shouldn't, for your own credibility, you shouldn't join. Rabbi let's say Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore it doesn't matter. The judges don't have to know when you chose a judge and they chose a judge. They don't have to know who the third party is. The plaintiff and the defendant, they can choose whoever they want. But if the judges have to know who they are joining with. Everyone holds that you need to know who the third party is. And you misunderstood the Mishnah. Everyone agrees that judges are involved. The question is the plaintiff and defendant also involved? Do they also have to agree or not? But that's at the end of the they need keep looking down about that dinner. Do you need the defendant and plaintiff involved? We need their involvement, and the bonus das at the other being we don't need it. Good for let's analyze it. We learned similar things. The people were very modest in Shleim. This is what they did. First of all, they would never sign the stat who they signed with. Number one. Number two, the same reason. Either because it's degrading, if they sit down with somebody who's not up to par, or because if one of the Yanima judges, they will be possible. But they wouldn't enter a meal. Who sat with him? Now the chayt over here is only shy because it's a design. Nothing to do about being disqualified. But we had a Gemara in Yuma, the Shlokish would not talk to people in the street because people, if they saw the Shlokish talking to you, right away gave them credibility, say, oh, we can trust another person. And then it would cast the spirit of the Shlokish, that other person turned out to be a very shady character. So maybe over here also, if we sit with the students together, people say, so you associating with this great rabbi, then you must be an honest person, and turns out to be the guy's a ganef, and they'll blame the rabbi for it. So therefore, it's not covered on Torah, mitzvah din, maybe they should disassociate. Maybe you can use that logic as well. Anyway, the Mishnah continues. I can disqualify your judges. What do you mean you can disqualify judges? And the Chachamim say only their grounds. What's Pshat Meir? Kol Kamini, the Apostle Daniel might believe just to disqualify the Dayanim. We're talking about this. What we said before. We're talking about ordinary judges had to simple people like say, look, I want learned people. I'm a mumchim loy, but you cannot even according to me, I cannot disqualify experts. So what are you talking about? Look at the wording of the Chacham. You're trying to say when only you have I can bring proof. Bisman maybe I prove shein craving of psulim. They were kosher. They were experts. And you cannot disqualify them, and their arguments are made. That means I may hold that even experts you could disqualify because maybe mumchin but I can just say, look, I don't keep an expert, I don't want him. Mumchin, the word mumchin mipibezin does not mean you thought it means experts, doesn't mean that at all. If they were kosher people, according to the Chachamim, they're treated as if they were experts, and you cannot disqualify them unless you have grounds. And you cannot disqualify the guy that he chose. If he chose somebody, I cannot just disqualify your Zablo unless I have halachic problems. But otherwise, I can, like, a Korav, apostle, but otherwise I cannot disqualify. Toshma coming here, just trying to still discern what Meir meant when he said disqualify. Right now, we're saying that Meir only disqualifying ordinary judges. Let's bring it out from Braisa. It says the Chacham Meir, you're not believed to disqualify a dain who's a mumche l'rabim. Sounds like even an expert. The Chacham say you cannot disqualify, but Meir would seem to hold that you could. And we're trying to understand why, how. Amos, so we say no. Interpret loikol hemli. You're not believed that you can disqualify dayan shehim rablim, that the public agreed to accept as a dayan, even though the guy is not an expert. Tanya, we learned. It says actually clearly. It says that I can disqualify a dayan, unless as possible, I can go ahead and disqualify Achi Kabul Ola Bifnei Bezin unless you're Mikabel in front of a Bezin. In front of a Bezin. The only time is I can disqualify if it's Mamish Bezin. I cannot disqualify. But if it's a person that was appointed by a Bezin, I can disqualify. And the Chacham say you can't. But Mumchim, real Mumchim, no way I can disqualify. Give it a meir. Well, was a question. Let's continue that case. A mayor holds I can disqualify your witnesses. Now, every witness who saw an event, they're like the experts on that particular event because they're the only ones that saw it. And the mayor says I can disqualify. Well, Eidim are experts. But Amar Mayor. So the previous thing we said no question. The mayor said I can disqualify anybody unless they're mamash a mumcha. They were appointed. They are a mumcha, an expert. I cannot disqualify. Everybody else I can. But look at Eidim. Every Eid is considered a mumcha, and yet I can disqualify. I'm going to be that place where I can disqualify. Says Gemara, it's not a question. Didn't we learn, which we'll discuss it soon in more detail? Peh Kodesh Yema Dov Bezek in a holy mouth like Meir say something like this. I can just disqualify witnesses, and the whole court system will crumble. What's left? Tani, Eidai, even though, because remember everything was oral. Say that the word was not Eidav in plural, I can disqualify a single aid. We'll delineate what that means. And since it's only a single aid, I can disqualify. Says the Gemara, what do you, so therefore it's not considered a mumcha, because what's a single aid? You need two aids. A single aid is not a mumcha, and that's why I can disqualify. Dayanim, they're not mumcha, I can disqualify. So Gemara now works for it. Aid or lemai. What do you mean a single aid? A single aid to come and say this guy owes $100, and of course the single aid is I don't have to disqualify him. A single aid can't make me pay. The Rahman Apostle, the Torah already disqualified him. Navas ilashua. The Torah says that an aid echad does not come for mammon, but like the beginning of Satan will come, but for shua, an aid echad can make you swear. So for the swearing, they're a mumcha, and yet I can disqualify you. So it shows that you can disqualify a mumcha. Ilashua hemulim hemulim kibay today. He's believed like two. Money, like the cobbler, like they say, we're talking about a case of a single witness where I accept, I said, if you could bring a witness, I'll accept it, I'll accept the testimony. So even though halachically he's not considered like two, but I said I will consider him like two. Says Rameir, so this person's not really a mumcha, I just created him. I gave him the position of mumcha, just like he said before that, Dayan, that's not really a mumcha, but the rabbin accepted him. I accepted him as two, and then I changed my mind. That's what Amay says you could disqualify. My kamashma, the moti hadabay. So what are you trying to tell me? That I can change my mind? That's the whole chiddush of mission. Amay is saying I can change my mind if I created a situation that I don't like. I can change it. We already learned it. I believe my father or I believe your father to be a judge, which halacha can't. Or I accept 3 shepherds, and shepherds are disqualified at the anim. And so Steve, talking about the bezin. Whatever is disqualified, but we accept it. I can always change my mind because halachically they're not really. So this is a case of Hinchela Rab. It's not really mumche. They've just been appointed. Here they've been, and I change my mind. You can't just say here a case of judge. I change my mind. Same thing by Aiden. I said one aid will be like 2, treated like 2, and then I change my mind. Why can't I change my mind? The son of Nachman, son of Yosef said, that the case of the father, the case of your father are accepted as one witness. So in fact, I accepted two points that are not hapei halacha. First of all, a relative can be a dayan, and we accepted that. And second of all, you need 3 judges, and I accepted 1 to be treated like 3. So in the case of Abba and Avicha, it's a lesser of a chiddush. I could change your mind. And then a bigger chiddush that even Gimel Bakar, so we had 3. Except that they're disqualified, and we accepted it. You can even there change your mind. Why do I need the din that by Eidim I can change my mind? We already know that by Tayanim we can change your mind. So it's the same thing, isn't it? But no, judges changing your mind, and it's very different. You know why? Not in the case of Gimel Rei Bakar, but in the case of Abba and Abicha, there's a bigger chiddush there as well. You know what the chiddush is? My father, your father are qualified judges for everyone else. Except not for us, because they're our relatives. So because the chiddush is that even so, I can change your mind and say I don't want him anymore. But in the case of a single aid to act like 2 aidim, it's never the case that can happen. So surely I should be able to change my mind. So there's a bigger chiddush in the case of Abba and Avicha. I need this case of Abba and Avicha, even though they're qualified dayanim for everybody else. And once I accepted them l'chayda, so they should be qualified for us. The chiddush is you can still change your mind. It's Abba Avicha. I would say, you cannot change your mind. Should Abba Avicha? They're qualified for everybody else. Abba Chad kibay today, but one witness to be treated like 2 witnesses. They're not qualified for anybody. So maybe I can change even a bundle. I can change my mind, and that's why we need the argument by aid and say no, you cannot change your mind. And the same thing there is the converse. The ashminan. If we only knew the case of Aid, I would say, only by Aid I change your mind because he's not qualified to be 2 witnesses anyway. Abba Bahib, in the case of Abba Avicha with the qualified judges, the problem is only us. I would have thought that Meir agrees. Once you made up that they're qualified to adjudicate your case, that's it. You can no longer change your mind. It's irreversible. Says the Gemara, let's go back to the original shot. Midiktani, it says, Reisha Dai I can disqualify your judge. And the Sefer, it says, a dove witnesses, Alma, Dafkiktoni. It sounds like when it comes to witnesses, even because I'm changing from singular to plural, so the Mishnah is very pedantic. And because the Mishnah wrote that even Adim, Alma, what do we see? That Dafkiktoni, and I want that Adim I can disqualify even two. And therefore, this whole point of the Shlokish saying, Peh, Kodesh, how in the world can I make say that you could disqualify two Adim? He meant one Aid. Can't be. Because it says Adim, and goes back to that question. Adim are considered like experts, and Mumchin. And you said when it comes to judges, even a mayor's Moidu, you cannot disqualify Mumchin experts. So how in the world can a mayor say, I can disqualify your Adim, your two Adim? And the problem is twofold. Not only Mumchin, then Bechal. You're undermining the whole justice system. So now we'll have a few answers. Like this. Omar Abulazar, we have a few answers. Abulazar comes along and says, the case of Adam is that you were two Adam there, but I'm not coming alone to disqualify them. I'm coming with another party to disqualify them. You need two Adam to disqualify two Adam. That's accusing us of being a ganif. But in this case, I am one of those two Adam. The obvious question is, how can you treat my testimony at all with any credibility? I'm an gay be'edus. I'm biased. We'll see in a minute. So what it says, that I and someone else comes to disqualify the Adim. So therefore you have two agents saying that the Adim there are disqualified, myself and another Adim, third party, and I'm believed. And we're talking about, and when it comes to the case of judges, we're talking about judges that were not experts, like we said before. We're talking about Koya Shivasuri, we're talking about Koya Shivasuri, not experts. So Dayanim is not a problem. Adim is not a problem. You know why? Because there are two witnesses there, myself and another party, and that's why we could disqualify. Says the Gemara. Kol Kamini, how can I be believed? They gave Edus, I'm in the gave Edus. We're talking about a case where we're disqualified by casting aspersions. What kind of aspersions? What kind of expression? Accusing the Aiden that the plaintiff brought, that they are ganovim, so you have no credibility. How can I be believed? I'm very biased. I'm trying to defend myself. Kolkamina negay Vedusa, he's negay Vedas. We're talking about an error, an accusation or an allegation that there's something wrong with the entire family. They're all slaves, for example, and therefore he's disqualified. But because we're not talking about you personally, we're talking about the family. I'm believed. A mayor says, I'm believed to disqualify you. Why? Because I'm not talking about you personally, I'm talking about you're just an ancillary, right? You're a consequence. And therefore, that's all right. The Inu, the Melech apostle, is possible. And the Rabban hold, Soif Negay Beidusa, who is Negay Beidus. Now, there's a big question. What exactly is Negay Beidus? What's the psul? The Achreim have a discussion. Is the psul because I'm lying? I'm trying to defend myself. Is that the problem? Or is the problem on the gay Be'edus is I'm talking about myself, I'm the closest relative. If my relative cannot say Edus about myself, how can I say Edus about myself? I'm closer to myself than anybody else. So the problem is a technical problem. Not because we think you're lying, but we think that what you're Adam Kodevetz Atzmai, and therefore how can you negate Be'edus as if you're a relative to yourself? And that's going to be the Shakta. That's the Shakta Gemara here, and throughout the Gemara. If you learn that it's a question of Karev apostle, I'm a relative, since I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about some of the family, and you just happen to be a consequence, then maybe it's all right. But the Gemara says no. The Gemara says, but there are and that's what Amer says. Therefore, I can say it. But Rabbanan say no. That Negeya, the problem is that you might be lying. So who cares? You're talking about the family. Ultimately, I'm the beneficiary of this aid, so therefore, I still might be lying. So what if it's a step removed? But ultimately, that's the outcome, my benefit. That's the Machlekes Meir and the Chachamim. What exactly is the basis for the prohibition or the disqualification of Gei Be'edus? Is it because we're scared you're lying, and I'm going to Gei Be'edus even in this case, or is it because I am a relative to myself? And therefore, since I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the family, I'm all right. Then the Gemara says, another explanation, Machlekes, you know what we're talking about over here? There are two groups of Eidim. There are actually two ways of learning the Gemara. Rashi's first pshat and Rabbeinu Tam. So we'll learn that way because that's our version of the Gemara. Rashi doesn't like it actually, and he gives a second pshat, but it will be a different. It will change around the whole. I guess the text of the Gemara. So we'll learn the text of our Gemara, which is the first pshat of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So the Gemara is like this: you brought that the plaintiff says, I have two groups of Eidim. The Rameir holds Sorech Levarer. We already had this in both Basra. Rameir holds that if you said you have two groups of Eidim, then you need to bring both groups of Eidim. If you only brought one, then your entire credibility is shot. So you have to bring two groups of Eidim. And therefore, if you have to bring two groups of Eidim, when you brought the first group and we disqualified the first group and said, oh, they're Ganov, whatever it is, I'm not in the gay Be'edis because Monoshech. If you don't bring the second group of Eidim, anyway, your first group is disqualified because Tzarech Levada, you said you have two groups, you must bring both. And if you do bring the second group, then we don't need the first group anymore. And who cares if it's disqualified? You kept your word, you brought two groups, and the first group, but you still have a second group, and they're gonna, and their Eidim will bear fruit. So my Eidim against your first Eidim have no bearing on the outcome of the case. So therefore, I'm not in the gay Eidim. So the main holds all about it, but it's all about it. So since the Rabban hold no, if you have one group, and even though I said I have two, I don't have to bring another one. So I am the gay Eidim the first one because right now that's the only group we have, and it benefits me. And if you don't bring in a second group, they would have been the only Eidim. But everyone agrees there was only one group. Of course, I wouldn't be believed. Hakel and Yochel the can disqualify them. What happens? Ain't now. What if there's only one group? What's it then? You ask, what do you mean? Well, you just said ain't achas, but you just said there's only one group you can disqualify. I'm the gay Vedas. Ella, the Gemara said this is what he meant. What happened? He did bring the second group, but it turned out the second group was disqualified. So now we have to rely on the first group, but we disqualified the first group first, and at that time it was not the gay beta. So what happens in that case? Do we say, well, retrospectively it turned out to be that they were the only group and that we relied on them, and because of us and not some of the gay betas, or not? Now, look, at the time when they said the Aedis, they were kosher. There was no bias then because you thought that we knew that the second group had to come, and so on, and therefore it would have had any bearing on the case. And once it's accepted, that's it. They've been eliminated. And I retrospectively turned out to be they're the group that we need to rely on. It doesn't matter. Then my first aid is we disqualified them is a good disqualification. The others say that Ravashi said it. The first Eidim have already testified. See again. Ravashi is in the discussion. The rest of the Gemara is all without any names, and yet it's a Shakotay in the Gemara, and we have this all the time. I'm just pointing it out now. Name says the Gemara. Let us say this idea of Tzorech Levar or not, which we had also about Basa, is based on a machlekes between Rebbe and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. What's the story there? We learned about Basra, the third Pedic, and then we learned again later on that you have to have a shtar, a document, to prove that you bought this property, but if 3 years go by and nobody staked any claims on the property, and then you lost the contract, and you say, look, I've been here 3 years, nobody made any allegations that it's their property, and I had a shtar, but I bought it, I had a good taina, chazaki taina, had a good claim, but I lost the shtar. 3 years, people are not careful with their shtar. So what happens? The person says, look, I have a shtar and I have a chazaka. Does he have to produce both the shtar and the chazaka, or either one is good enough? So exactly the same question. Tzorech Levar, the ones if you speak too much, you offer too much, maybe you ruin yourself because bring us the shtar as well as the chazaka. We'll see. Time to learn. How about the shtar? The chazaka needs the shtar. Rebbe says, no, the shtar is sufficient. You don't have. If you have a shtar, it's good enough. And we don't have to also bring forward the chazaka. Shimon says neither the chazaka, and Shimon says no. Chazaka. Now, what do you mean neither the chazaka? And what shtar is no good? What's better than a document to prove that the property is mine? But the chazaka the shtar, you cannot prove the plus document. And the meant was that you need both the document and the chazaka. Why you need both? Because you mentioned both. Tzorech Levar. The kaim of Tzorech Levar, please the argument Tzorech Levar. You really know. Eliba de Rashbag. I can say that the argument there in Baba Basra is very different than the argument here. This is the very end of Baba Basra. Eliba de Shimon says you need both. You're right. No question. You need Levada. You said Shtar Chazaka, bring Eidim. You had a Chazaka, produce the document. The contract of sale. There's no argument. Keep pligi, the argument is according to Rebbe. Rameya says, I hold like Rebbe. What? Even though I proffered two different forms of proof, I don't have to bring both forms of proof. One is enough. But the Rabbanan say, even Rebbe you cannot support. It bring you as a basis. You know why? They'll say to you that Chazak is very different. The case of Karka is very different. Over there, you don't have to bring both, but in a normal case, maybe you do. Now, why should there be different? Why don't you have to bring both? Because when I say I was in the land 3 years, nobody said anything. You could be a squatter, and a squatter doesn't make it yours. None of us. I have to have a taina. And my taina is I bought it from you. And when I bought it, I had a contract. So the entire chazak is predicated on the fact that you had a star. So so therefore, Rebbe says, in this case, you don't have to bring both. Normally, you have to bring both forms of proof. You have two sets of witnesses, bring both. But over here, the chazaka doesn't do it. Chazaka means nothing. Chazaka only tells us you had a star once. Well, I have the original, the star. What do I need the chazaka for? So in this case, Rebbe says you don't need both. The chazaka is predicated on the star. Over here, the two separate groups of Eidim, two separate forms of evidence. Bring it. After the Rebbe made it, that they ain't sort of about it. Even Rebbe says that maybe you don't have to be Mavara. Yeah. Okay, so this way we bring the proof. So this is one way of explaining. Another way of explaining the Mishnah. Okay. So the Rebbe over here holds you have to bring a star because the whole place of chazaka is the star. What's the chazaka? The star. So you need to bring me the star. What's the point of chazaka? Once you told me I have a star, you got to bring a star. But over there, two separate groups of Eidim. So Rebbe said by Eidim, you have one group of Eidim that brings one, and the other group, so the Rabban holds generally speaking, maybe you don't have to be Mavarer, but of what do you call that? The Rebbe. In other words, Rab Shimon, let's make sure we get it straight. Rab Shimon gonna hold you can bring either chazaka or star. I said chazaka. I think I said before means also with chazaka. No, Rab Shimon gonna hold you can bring either chazaka or star because ain't tzarich levara. You don't have to bring any support. So you have a chazaka, bring a chazaka. Rebbe says that you have to bring the star as well, which means that Rebbe holds the chayil tzarich levara. So we're saying no. That over here, why Rebbe insists that you bring the document the star, even though you have witness of chazaka, is because the base of chazaka is that you bought it. Now you tell the star, then we have to bring the star. But in the case of two Eidim, even though you mentioned that you have two separate groups of Eidim, ain't tzarech levada. One group is not predicated on the other group, so therefore either evidence is good enough. They're totally unrelated to each other, two disparate forms of evidence. That's good enough. That's the way we learn Pshat. The first Pshat in Rashi and Rabbein Tam. I told before Rashi is exactly the opposite. The way I think I said it for a minute, but we're learning now the Pshat, the first Pshat in Rashi. That's how we continue. Now the Gemara has another version which is almost the same, and we're finishing with this. And Ravin Amar Rabbi Yechon. That was Abdimi, and we had this consistently. Abdimi and Ravin come back. It seems that there were two different periods, and Rabbi Yechon sometimes amended his words. So Ravin came to Rabbi Yechon, and he said the following shot. What do you mean that Meir says that you can disqualify someone else's Eidim? Eidim are mumchin. We know that the Yoni mumchin you cannot disqualify. How can you disqualify Eidim? Plus, you're undermining the whole court system. So, so we said before that we're talking about. You said there were two groups of Eidim. And two groups of Eidim. And therefore Rameir holds that if you have two groups of Eidim, you have to bring the second group anyway. So nothing wrong with disqualifying the first. I'm not negating Eidim because it makes no difference to the whole case. You got to bring the second group. And if they're good, they are not sufficient to extract the money. Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi said, Rabbi Yechon say, Reisha be'edim psulim. This is what happens. The Reisha is talking about that there were Eidim all turned out to be what happened was the plaintiff or the defendant said that the witness is apostle and that the Yanim apostle. He said they're both disqualified. But it turned out to be that he was right about the witnesses. And now we're looking at the judges. Remember, there were two cases there. One where I disqualify the judges, and Amei says you're believed, and one I disqualify the witnesses, and Amei says you're believed. So before we said the judges were not mumchin. Now we're saying, no, the judges can be mumchin, and I'm still believed. You know why? Because I disqualified both. The Mishnah talking about in both cases, I disqualified the witness and the judges. But what happened in the first case was it turned out to be that I was right regarding the witnesses. And if you believe me regarding the witnesses, and since I accused both of the parties to be corrupt and then disqualified, I'm believed also disqualified as the Yonim. Even though I have no evidence to disqualify the Yonim. And the Mumchin. But since I'm believed in part, I'm believed in all. Migui the Posli Eidim, Posli Namidayan. Since he believed that I can disqualify the witnesses, I can also disqualify the judges. Safer, and the next case is that I disqualified the judges and the witnesses. It turned out to be that the judges are right. I was disqualified, but they have no evidence for witnesses. I made it again, holds in Migui. Since it turned out to be that I was right regarding the judges, they were all disqualified and corrupt. I'm also believed regarding the witnesses. Safer b'dayanim, so they the Migui, the Pasuk dayanim, Pasuk b'dayanim, believe them both. Migui. Masculine Rabba has a question. Bishlem and Migui, the Postle Aiden, Postle it makes sense. Okay, it turned out to be I was right regarding the witnesses. I'm also right regarding the judges because you can always go to another court with no big deal. You can be din. So therefore, let's move it to another court and find some other witnesses. Because the ones you brought were disqualified. And because I'm believed to disqualify the judges, I made him believe to disqualify the witnesses. Well, Adim Suleka, what's he supposed to do? These are the only witnesses he had, and the kosher witness, perhaps. Just because I turn out to be the judge of corrupt and I'm right, on what basis he disqualified? It doesn't make sense. So says he right? We're talking about a case here with the two groups of witnesses, and I still have another group of witnesses out there. And therefore, I'm believed to disqualify the first witness because of Migli. not with the gay haters, do with Migli. I have no evidence that they're possible. I'm not even accusing them of possible. I'm just saying they're possible with no basis. But because of Migli, I'm believed. Why? Because there's another group of witnesses anyway. So if the Taka wasn't another group, I cannot disqualify them. Right? Because these are the only witnesses. What right? I have no basis to say what I'm saying. Just because I'm believed for the judges, why should I be believed for the witnesses? The guy has no other witnesses. Nu Heinz Ravdimi is the exact same outcome as Ravdimi. We're talking about two cases, two sets of witnesses. I'm believed only on the first one. So there's a difference. Migli, the concept of Migli. Mar Savra Amrin and Migli. Over here, Ravdimi holds he believes in the concept of Migli, at least according to the mayor. Mar Savra, Ravdimi has Loy Amrin and Migli. No one believes in me because I'm believed in one thing and I made another accusation. I should be believed in other. Two disparate cases. I got to prove each accusation. We'll stop here and continue tomorrow on this.